Hello and welcome. Today we're reading a story by Franz Kafka titled The Hunger Artist. This story is about a man who fasts, or doesn't eat, for weeks on end to entertain others. Thus, he is a hunger artist. But he is also perpetually unhappy. He is just unhappy with everything because his fast has to end. And he wants to see how long he can go. So that's kind of like a little summary or a little idea of what this story is about. Let's look at the author. You may have heard of his name before. Franz Kafka is best known for his work, which illustrates the absurdity and weirdness of life. His work is often surreal. It has themes of magic realism. His style of writing is also inspired an adjective based on his name, Kafkaesque, which refers to a story with bizarre elements. Kafka was born in Prague, Bohemia, now the Czech Republic, in 1883 to a middle-class Jewish family. He graduated from school in 1901 with good grades in Latin, Greek, and history. He then graduated from the Charles Ferdinand University of Prague with a degree in law. After his obligatory one-year service as a law clerk, he worked for an Italian insurance agency, which he hated, and for the Workers' Accident Institute for the Kingdom of Bohemia, which he liked, until he retired in 1922 due to ill health caused by tuberculosis. Despite his day job, he focused on his literary career when he could, but published very little of his work in his lifetime. One of his most popular works, The Metamorphosis, was completed in 1912 and published in 1915. In 1924, he finally succumbed to his tuberculosis, so many of his works remained unpublished until after his death. Then they were taken by his good friend, Max Brod, and then Max published them on behalf of his friend. So now that we have an idea of Kafka's life and a little bit of the story, let's get into it, shall we? A Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka. During these last decades, the interest in professional fasting has markedly diminished. It used to pay very well to stage such great performances under one's own management. But today, that is quite impossible. We live in a different world now. At one time, the whole town took a lively interest in the hunger artist. From day to day of his fast, the excitement mounted. Everybody wanted to see him at least once a day. There were people who bought season tickets for the last few days and sat from morning till night in front of his small barred cage. Even in the nighttime, there were visiting hours, when the whole effect was heightened by torch flares. On fine days, the cage was set out in the open air, and then it was the children's special treat to see the hunger artist. For their elders, he was often just a joke that happened to be in fashion. But the children stood open-mouthed, holding each other's hands for greater security, marveling at him as he sat there, pallid in black tights, with his ribs sticking out so prominently, not even on a seat, but down among straw on the ground, sometimes giving a courteous nod, answering questions with a constrained smile, or perhaps stretching an arm through the bars so that one might feel how thin it was, and then again withdrawing deep into himself, paying no attention to anyone or anything, not even to the all-important striking of the clock that was the only piece of furniture in his cage, but merely staring into vacancy with half-shut eyes, now and then taking a sip from a tiny glass of water to moisten his lips. Beside casual onlookers, there were also relays of permanent watchers selected by the public, usually butchers, strangely enough, and it was their task to watch the hunger artist day and night, 3 of them at a time, in case he should have some secret recourse to nourishment. This was nothing but a formality, instigated to reassure the masses, for the initiates knew well enough that during his fast the artist would never in any circumstances, not even under forcible compulsion, swallow the smallest morsel of food. The honor of his profession forbade it. Not every watcher, of course, was capable of understanding this. There were often groups of night watchers who were very lax in carrying out their duties and deliberately huddled together in a retired corner to play cards with great absorption, obviously intending to give the hunger artist the chance of a little refreshment, which they supposed he would draw from some private hoard. Nothing annoyed the artist more than these watchers. They made him miserable. They made his fast seem unendurable. Sometimes he mastered his feebleness sufficiently to sing during their watch for as long as he could keep going, to show them how unjust their suspicions were. But that was of little use. They only wondered at his cleverness, in being able to fill his mouth even while singing. Much more to his taste were the watchers who sat up close to the bars, who were not content with the dim night lighting of the hall, but focused him in the full glare of the electric pocket torch given them by the impresario. The harsh light did not trouble him at all. In any case, he could never sleep properly, and he could always drowse a little, whatever the light, at any hour, even when the hall was thronged with noisy onlookers. He was quite happy at the prospect of spending a sleepless night with such watchers. He was ready to exchange jokes with them, to tell them stories out of his nomadic life, anything at all to keep them awake and demonstrate to them again that he had no eatables in his cage, and that he was fasting as not one of them could fast. But his happiest moment was when the morning came and an enormous breakfast was brought for them, at his expense, on which they flung themselves with the keen appetite of healthy men after a weary night of wakefulness. Of course, there were people who argued that this breakfast was an unfair attempt to bribe the watchers, but that was going too far, and when they were invited to take a night's vigil without a breakfast, merely for the sake of the cause, they made themselves scarce, although they stuck stubbornly to their suspicions. Such suspicions, anyhow, were a necessary accompaniment to the profession of fasting. No one could possibly watch the hunger artist continuously day and night, and so no one could produce first-hand evidence that the fast had really been rigorous and continuous. Only the artist himself could know that. He was therefore bound to be the sole completely satisfied spectator of his own fast. Yet for other reasons he was never satisfied. It was not perhaps mere fasting that had brought him to such skeleton thinness that many people had regretfully to keep away from his exhibitions, because the sight of him was too much for them. Perhaps it was the dissatisfaction with himself that had worn him down, for he alone knew what no other initiate knew, how easy it was to fast. It was the easiest thing in the world. He made no secret of this, yet people did not believe him. At best, they set him down as modest. Most of them, however, thought he was out for publicity, or else was some kind of cheat who found it easy to fast, because he had discovered a way of making it easy, and then had the impudence to admit the fact more or less. He had to put up with all that, and in the course of time had gotten used to it. But his inner dissatisfaction always rankled, and never yet, after any term of fasting, this must be granted to his credit, had he left the cage of his own free will. The longest period of fasting was fixed by his impresario at 40 days. Beyond that term he was not allowed to go, not even in great cities, and there was good reason for it, too. Experience had proven that for about 40 days the interest of the public could be stimulated by a steadily increasing pressure of advertisement. But after that, the town began to lose interest. Sympathetic support began notably to fall off. There were, of course, local variations as between one town and another, or one country and another, but as a general rule, 40 days marked the limit. So, on the 40th day, the flower-bedecked cage was opened, enthusiastic spectators filled the hall, a military band played, 2 doctors entered the cage to measure the results of the fast, which were announced through a megaphone, and finally 2 young ladies appeared, blissful at having been selected for the honor, to help the hunger artist down the few steps leading to a small table, on which was spread a carefully chosen invalid repast. At this very moment the artist always turned stubborn. True, he would entrust his bony arms to the outstretched helping hands of the ladies bending over him, but stand up he would not. Why stop fasting at this particular moment, after 40 days of it? He had held out for a long time, an illimitably long time. Why stop now, when he was in his best fasting form? Or rather, not yet quite in his best fasting form. Why should he be cheated of the fame he would get for fasting longer? For being not only the record hunger artist of all time, which presumably he was already, but for beating his own record by performance beyond human imagination, since he felt that there were no limits to his capacity for fasting. His public pretended to admire him so much, why should have so little patience with him? If he couldn't endure fasting longer, Why shouldn't the public endure it? Besides, he was tired, he was comfortable sitting in the straw, and now he was supposed to lift himself to his full height and go down to a meal the very thought of which gave him a nausea that only the presence of the ladies kept him from betraying. And even that was with an effort. And he looked up into the eyes of the ladies, who were apparently so friendly, and in reality so cruel, and shook his head, which felt too heavy on its strengthless neck. But then there happened again what always happened. The impresario came forward without a word, for the band made speech impossible, lifted his arms up in the air above the artist, as if inviting heaven to look down upon this creature here in the straw, this suffering martyr, which indeed he was, although in quite another sense, grasped him around the emaciated waist with exaggerated caution, so that the frail condition he was in might be appreciated, and committed him to the care of the two blenching ladies, not without secretly giving him a shaking, so that his legs and body tottered and swayed. The artist now submitted completely. His head lolled on his breast as if it had landed there by chance. His body was hollowed out. His legs, in a spasm of self-preservation, clung close to each other at the knees, yet scraped on the ground as if it were not really solid ground, as if they were only trying to find solid ground. And the whole weight of his body, a featherweight after all, relapsed onto one of the ladies, who, looking around for help and panting a little, this post of honor was not at all what she had expected it to be, first stretched her neck as far as she could to keep her face at least free from contact with the artist. Then, finding this impossible, and her more fortunate companion not coming to her aid, but merely holding extended in her own trembling hand the little bunch of knuckle bones that was the artist's, to the great delight of the spectators, burst into tears and had to be replaced by an attendant who had long been stationed in readiness. Then came the food, a little of which the impresario managed to get between the artist's lips, while he sat in a kind of half-fainting trance, to the accompaniment of cheerful patter designed to distract the public's attention for the artist's condition. After that, a toast was drunk to the public, supposedly prompted by a whisper from the artist in the impresario's ear. The band confirmed it with a mighty flourish, the spectators melted away, and no one had any cause to be dissatisfied with the proceedings. No one, except the hunger artist himself. He only, as always. So, that was a little portion of The Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka. So it appears that the hunger artist loves his job, perhaps a little bit too much. And it seems that he is the only one unhappy at the ending of his confinement. Well, we will have to see what goes on in the next section. He did mention at the beginning that the role of the hunger artist was becoming less prominent. I wonder what that's going to mean for our friend here. What is going to happen to him? And what will be his final role in all of this? So I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, you can pick this short story up for yourself and finish it and see what happens. We will be continuing this with the next recording on the 24th, and we will be finishing the story. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again next time.